The moment she said those words, the laughter around the table froze. My own son didn't defend me, not even a glance. So I picked up my hat, looked at the guests one last time, and walked away from that hall, but I wasn't walking alone. I never thought I'd be the one walking out of my own son's wedding. The morning had started perfectly, warm sunlight spilling through the church windows, Eric looking nervous but proud in his suit, and Clara, his bride, glowing in that white dress that looked like it belonged in a magazine. I stood in the back row, trying not to cry when they said their vows. I remember thinking, your mother would have been proud, son. By evening, everyone had moved to the reception hall. Candles, soft jazz, the smell of roast chicken and cheap perfume. I wasn't used to that kind of crowd. Clara's family was, well, different. Expensive watches, loud voices, people who never looked at me for more than a second before moving on to someone more interesting. I didn't care. I wasn't there for them. I was there for my boy. When the speeches started, I was called up after her father, a man who talked for 10 minutes about money and building connections. My turn came. I stood up, holding my glass, my hand shaking a little. I just want to say, I began, my voice catching, that no matter what happens in life, remember, love isn't built on wealth, it's built on respect. I learned that from your mother, God rest her soul. Some people clapped politely. Others just stared at their plates. I sat down, embarrassed, but proud I'd said it. Later, when dinner was almost over, I walked up to their table. I had a small box in my hand, something I made in my workshop. Walnut wood, polished by hand, carved with their initials, E and C. Inside was my late wife's wedding ring. I wanted Clara to have it. Clara, I said, smiling softly. This belonged to Eric's mother. I thought it might mean something to you both. She looked at the box, then at me. Her smile froze. She leaned toward Eric and whispered something. He glanced at me briefly, then looked away. And then she said it, clear, sharp, cutting through the chatter like broken glass. Get out of here. At first, I thought she was joking. I even smiled awkwardly. Excuse me. Her eyes hardened. I said, get out. You've embarrassed Eric enough today. Please, just leave. The room went silent. No one moved. No one spoke. The violinist stopped mid-note. I looked at my son. He didn't look back, just stared at his napkin like a child being scolded. That silence, that was the part that hurt the most. So I nodded. Quietly. I didn't argue, didn't shout, didn't make a scene. I simply placed the box on the table, turned around, and walked toward the exit. The sound of my footsteps on the wooden floor felt deafening. The night air outside was cool and heavy. I could hear muffled laughter behind the door again. They'd moved on. My son's wedding continued as if I'd never existed. I stood by the parking lot for a while, watching the lights flicker in the distance. My hands were trembling, not from anger, but from something colder, realization. All these years, I tried to be there for him, paid for his college, fixed his car, helped him buy their first apartment. And now, I was just an inconvenience, something to be hidden away like an old photograph. I was about to get into my truck when I heard a voice behind me. Mr. Lawson? It was Lena, Clara's younger sister. She looked different from the rest of her family. No makeup, simple dress, nervous eyes. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, she said, her breath visible in the cool air. What she did in there, it was cruel. You didn't deserve that. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. Lena hesitated, then added quietly, I don't want to be in there either. And before I could stop her, she walked past me, away from the hall, her heels clicking on the pavement. She didn't even look back. I stood there for a moment, confused. You shouldn't. I know, she interrupted. But I can't stay and pretend that was okay. So we walked together, two people who didn't belong in that room full of smiles. The laughter behind the walls grew fainter with every step we took. As we reached the edge of the parking lot, I looked at her and said, You didn't have to do that. She smiled faintly. Maybe not. But someone had to. That's how the night ended. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with quiet footsteps and the sound of a heart breaking in the distance. But I didn't know then that walking away that night was just the beginning. The parking lot was nearly empty. The laughter and music from inside the hall drifted through the cold air like a distant echo, as if they belonged to another world. Lena and I stood under the yellow light of a lamppost, neither of us knowing what to say. She hugged her arms, shivering a little. You shouldn't have to leave your son's wedding like that, she said softly. I forced a smile. It's all right. I've been told worse things in my life. But the truth was, it wasn't all right. The words had cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Watching my son stay silent while his bride humiliated me in front of everyone, that wasn't something I could brush off. Do you want me to call you a taxi? I asked. She shook her head. No, I'll walk. It's not far. Besides, I can't sit in there pretending everything's fine. I nodded slowly. Then I'll walk you. We moved in silence at first, the gravel crunching beneath our shoes. The night smelled like rain and old pavement. Every few steps, I caught her glancing at me, curious, cautious. Finally, she said, Clara wasn't always like that. She used to be kind, I think. But after she met Eric, something changed. Her parents told her she was marrying beneath her. I frowned. Beneath her? She nodded. They think your son doesn't have the right background. No money, no name. They only agreed to the wedding because her father wanted to expand his business connections. You were never supposed to be here tonight. I think she wanted to make a point. I stopped walking. The words hit harder than I expected. So humiliating me was part of her show. Lena looked down. Maybe, but it backfired. You saw those faces in there. Even some of her friends looked ashamed. I exhaled slowly. The cold bit at my throat, but the anger inside kept me warm. My wife used to say that pride destroys faster than fire. I guess Clara will learn that someday. Lena gave a faint smile. You sound like someone who's been through a lot. I've built houses for 40 years. You learn a few things about what holds up and what falls apart. She nodded, thoughtful. Maybe that's why you carved that box. I saw it before she pushed it away. It was beautiful. I looked at her in surprise. You noticed that? I notice people who care, she said quietly. We reached the end of the street, where my old truck waited beneath a flickering streetlight. I opened the door and hesitated. Do you want me to give you a ride home? She hesitated too, then nodded. If you don't mind. The road back to town was dark and silent. The hum of the engine filled the space between us. I caught her reflection in the window, her face pale, eyes tired. She looked far too young to be carrying that kind of disappointment. Halfway through the drive, she spoke again. You know, Clara didn't just want Eric. She wanted control. Over him. Over everything. I heard her say it once. She liked the idea of fixing him. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Fixing him? What does that even mean? She thinks people like you and Eric are too humble, that you need to be shaped, taught how to fit in. She doesn't love him, Mr. Lawson. She loves the idea of winning. The words stung, but they didn't surprise me. I had seen that arrogance before, in men who thought money could replace decency, and in women who believed charm could disguise cruelty. When I pulled up near her small apartment building, Lena didn't move. She stared out the windshield for a long moment, then said, I know you're hurting, but don't let her break you. People like Clara only win if you let them. I looked at her, really looked at her. The sincerity in her eyes reminded me of my late wife. Honest, steady, kind. Thank you, I said. You didn't have to follow me out tonight. She smiled faintly. Maybe I needed to. As she stepped out of the truck, I realized something unexpected. The shame I felt when I left the wedding was fading, replaced by something else. Not revenge. Not yet. Just a quiet clarity. Because in that hall full of people who applauded cruelty, one person had chosen to walk out with me. And that meant the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 3 days passed before I heard from my son. No calls, no messages, not even a text asking if I got home safely. I spent those days in my workshop, sanding an old oak table I'd been restoring for a neighbor. It helped keep my hands busy, even when my mind refused to stay quiet. The silence in my house felt heavier than usual. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me of how full this place once was. Laughter, Sunday dinners, my wife humming while washing dishes. Now it was just me, a half-empty cup of coffee, and a phone that wouldn't ring. On the fourth morning, it finally did. Dad, just one word, dry and nervous. Eric, I said slowly. You're alive, then. He sighed. Can we talk? I'll come over. I wanted to say no. I wanted to hang up and let him feel what silence really meant. But I couldn't. He was still my son. All right, I said. Come by. It took him 40 minutes. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel and saw his car pull up, brand new, silver, the kind of thing Clara's father would have bought. When he stepped out, he looked smaller somehow. Guilt has a way of shrinking people. He stood by the fence, unsure if he should come closer. Coffee's hot. I called out. If you still drink it the way you used to. He followed me inside. The house smelled like sawdust and old books, the same way it always had. I poured us both a cup, and for a minute, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "Dad, I'm sorry about what happened." I looked at him. Which part? He swallowed. Clara. She was under a lot of stress. She didn't mean. I cut him off. Don't finish that sentence, Eric. Don't make excuses for cruelty. He rubbed his forehead, avoiding my eyes. She thought your speech embarrassed her family. She said it sounded like you were judging them. I laughed quietly. Maybe I was. But that's not why she told me to leave. She did it because she wanted to show them she could control even her husband's father. It was about power, not pride. Eric flinched, but didn't argue. That silence told me everything. Do you love her? I asked. He hesitated. Too long. I think so. You think so, I repeated. Then you already know the answer. He looked down into his cup. She's different, Dad. You don't understand her like I do. I leaned back in my chair. Maybe, but I understand people. And she's the kind who only looks happy when someone else is smaller than her. He stayed quiet. The clock ticked on the wall, steady, indifferent. After a moment, I said softly, "When your mother died, I promised I'd never interfere with your choices. But I also promised her I'd never let you lose yourself. So I'll say this once, Eric, don't confuse loyalty with blindness." He didn't answer. He just stood, walked to the window, and looked out into the yard. The wind moved the trees outside, scattering yellow leaves across the grass. "Dad," he said quietly, "I don't know how to fix this." I nodded. "Then don't. Just see it for what it is." He turned to face me, his eyes red. "She told me not to come here. Said you'd try to turn me against her. And yet you came." "Yeah," he whispered. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about you walking out like that." I smiled faintly. Walking out was easy. Living with what caused it, that's harder. He didn't stay long. Before he left, he paused at the door and said, "Clara's father offered me a job at his company. He said it's time I prove myself." I looked at him sharply. "That's not a gift, Eric. That's a leash." He didn't reply, just nodded, quietly ashamed, and left. As his car disappeared down the road, I stood by the window for a long time. Something in me had shifted, not anger, not sorrow, just a steady realization. If they wanted to measure worth in money, reputation, and pride, then maybe it was time to let them. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's letting them build their own downfall while you watch, in silence. That night, I opened my ledger and made a list of things I still owned: the old farmhouse, the tools, a few investments no one knew about. Clara's father thought I was just a poor retired carpenter. He had no idea how much of his daughter's wedding he'd really been standing on. And as I closed the book, I finally smiled. The game had quietly begun. 2 weeks passed. I didn't hear from Eric again. Not a single call, not even a text. I didn't expect one either. When a person is caught between love and guilt, they usually choose silence. It hurts less than the truth. Still, I couldn't help checking my phone every morning. Old habits die hard, even when your heart knows better. Then one day, while I was trimming the bushes outside, I saw a car pull up near my gate. A black SUV I'd never seen before. Out stepped a man in a gray suit, the kind who smiled with his mouth, but not his eyes. "Mr. Lawson?" he asked. "That's me." He extended a folder. "From Mr. Harper, Clara's father." I wiped my hands on my jeans before taking it. The paper was thick, expensive. Inside was a printed contract and a short note. "Mr. Lawson, since the wedding incident, we believe it's best that family matters remain separate. Please vacate the farmhouse by the end of the month. Robert Harper." I stared at the letter for a long time. The farmhouse, the same one I had rebuilt with my own hands, where Eric and Clara were supposed to move after the wedding. The land wasn't fully theirs yet. The deed still carried my name. I had planned to gift it to them once they proved they could care for it. And now this man, this polished snake, was telling me to leave my own property. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the folder, and said quietly, "Tell Mr. Harper I got his message." The man nodded. "He'll expect your cooperation." When he left, I didn't slam the door or curse the sky. I just sat on the porch, watching the wind move through the trees. The world was still. Too still. I went inside, brewed a cup of tea, and opened the same ledger I'd been keeping for years, the one where I tracked every nail, every plank, every bill I'd ever paid. The farmhouse deed was still there, under my name. The renovation permits were in my handwriting. The land taxes, the wiring upgrades, all of it tied to me. Harper wanted to take my home to prove he could. That's when I decided, quietly, calmly, that I wouldn't fight him. I'd let him build his own trap. The next day, I drove to town and stopped by the small law office where my friend Martin worked. He'd been my neighbor for 20 years before he retired from law, though he still handled local property cases. He looked up from his coffee when I walked in. "Well, if it isn't the man who taught me how to fix a fence. What brings you here, Rich?" I set the folder down. "A man just tried to evict me from my own house." He opened the letter, skimmed it, and chuckled darkly. "Oh, I've met Harper before. The kind of man who thinks contracts are weapons. Don't worry, you're safe. He's bluffing. You own this land outright." "I know," I said, "but I don't want him to know that I know." Martin raised an eyebrow. "You planning something?" "Not planning. Waiting." He smiled faintly. "That's worse. You've always been patient, too patient." "Patience builds houses," I said, "and sometimes it buries empires." Before leaving, I asked him to quietly recheck the property's registration and to flag any attempts to transfer ownership. He agreed. When I returned home, I noticed something odd. A small silver car parked down the road, engine running. Inside, I could see Clara in the passenger seat. Eric was driving. They didn't come out. They just sat there for a few minutes, maybe trying to build courage. Finally, Eric stepped out. Clara stayed inside, her sunglasses covering half her face. He walked toward the gate, hesitating. "Dad," he called softly. I met him halfway. "You got your father-in-law's message?" I asked. He nodded. I told him it's not right. He said you signed the land over years ago. I didn't. He looked startled. "What?" I said I didn't. Eric frowned. But Clara said. I cut him off. "Son, stop repeating what she says. Start thinking for yourself." He went quiet, eyes darting toward the car. Clara was staring at us, phone in hand, pretending to check messages. "I just want to make things right," Eric whispered. "She thinks we can start over if you take my house." He winced. "It's not like that. She said it's just a formality. Something to show her father she's in control." I almost laughed. Control. That word again. "Eric," I said quietly, "if you sign anything, you'll lose more than land. You'll lose your freedom. And once a person owns your choices, you're finished." He didn't answer. His face said he already knew. Then Clara rolled down the window and shouted, "Eric, we're leaving." Her voice was sharp, commanding, the same tone she used at the wedding. He looked at me one last time. "I'm sorry, Dad." "Don't be," I said. "Just don't forget what side of the fence you're standing on." He turned away. The car drove off, kicking dust into the air. That night, I sat on the porch again. The sky was red from the sunset, and the cicadas hummed like a slow drumbeat. I wasn't angry anymore, not even hurt, because I'd seen something in Eric's eyes before he left. Doubt. The kind that grows quietly until it tears a house down from the inside. And all I had to do was wait. A month later, the letter came again. This time, stamped, "Final notice." Harper didn't like being ignored. He wasn't used to people who stayed calm when threatened. The envelope was thicker this time. Inside was another demand, more formal, and a promise of legal escalation. I smiled as I read it. The man still believed he could scare me with paper. That afternoon, I took a slow walk to the edge of my property, the same land he thought he owned. The winter wind carried the smell of damp leaves, and the farmhouse stood quiet, proud, and unshaken. I placed my hand on the old oak post by the gate and whispered, "You're staying right here." A week later, I went into town to pick up some lumber. That's when I saw Lena again. She was standing outside the clinic in her nurse's uniform, her hair tied back, holding a paper bag of groceries. She smiled when she saw me, and for the first time in a while, I smiled back. "Mr. Lawson," she said warmly, "it's been a while." "It has," I replied, "and I think you can start calling me Richard." She laughed softly. "Only if you stop calling me Miss Harper." We walked a few blocks together, talking about work, the weather, anything but the wedding. Eventually, though, she sighed and said, "Clara's been acting strange lately. Paranoid, even. She's fighting with Eric every night. He called me last week just to ask if he could crash on my couch." I stopped walking. "Did he?" She nodded. "He didn't want you to know? He said she'd lose her mind if she found out." My chest tightened. I didn't know whether to feel pity or pride. Maybe both. Lena hesitated before continuing. Her father's company isn't doing well either. Some kind of failed investment. They've been selling off assets quietly, even Clara's car. She's been hiding it, pretending everything's fine. The wind shifted. Somewhere deep inside, I felt the slow burn of poetic balance. Fate was doing the heavy lifting for me. "Do you still have that farmhouse deed?" she asked carefully. "I do," I said. "And copies in 3 different places." She smiled knowingly. "Then maybe you should hold on to it a bit longer." That evening, I got a call from Eric. His voice was low, shaky. "Dad, can I come over?" "Always," I said simply. When he arrived, he looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. His tie was loose, eyes bloodshot. He dropped onto the couch like he'd been carrying bricks. "She's leaving," he said quietly. "She told me this morning she made a mistake marrying me. Her father's furious because the business is falling apart, and she blames me for everything." I poured him a glass of water. "And what did you say?" He laughed bitterly. "Nothing. What's left to say?" He rubbed his face, then looked up at me. "You were right, Dad. About all of it. I thought she loved me. I thought her family just needed time. But she never wanted me. Just the image of a husband she could show off." I sat down across from him. "Son, love without respect isn't love. It's ownership." He nodded slowly. "I know that now. She even told me her father plans to take the farmhouse anyway. Said it'll offset losses." I smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's time I stop being quiet." Eric looked at me, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, your father-in-law is about to find out that the old man he tried to step on is standing on the land he thinks he owns." The next morning, I called Martin. "Time to move forward," I told him. He chuckled. "You're finally making a move, huh?" "Not loud," I said. "Just enough to make them hear the walls cracking." We met at the county office later that day. Martin filed a formal declaration confirming the property's ownership under my name and submitted a quiet injunction preventing any transfer attempts. A simple act, but legally, it turned Harper's Bluff into a confession of fraud. By evening, I knew word had reached them. Clara showed up at my gate, furious. Her eyes were wild, her hair unkempt, her voice shaking. "You think you can humiliate my family?" she shouted. "You're nothing, you old man. Nothing." I stayed calm. "Then why does your father keep sending lawyers to a man who's nothing?" She clenched her fists, trembling. "You'll regret this." I smiled faintly. "I already have, but not for the reasons you think." She turned on her heel, storming off toward her car. Tires screeched as she drove away. The sky darkened. The air smelled like rain. I stood there a long time, watching the dust settle on the road she'd taken, the same road my son had once driven home on after school. Only this time, I wasn't waiting for an apology, because I knew something she didn't. Her family's empire was built on borrowed ground, and every lie she told was now standing on the land I owned. Sometimes revenge doesn't need shouting, lawyers, or violence. Sometimes it just needs patience and a signature. The first crack appeared 2 weeks later. A short article in the local business column. "Harper Construction faces allegations of fraudulent dealings." Just a few lines, but enough to shake the family's illusion of control. I read it over my morning coffee, the steam fogging my glasses. Below the headline was a single paragraph mentioning misused investor funds, falsified contracts, and an anonymous report submitted to the county's business bureau. I didn't write that report. I only provided the documents Martin helped me collect. The truth had done the rest. By noon, the phones at Harper's company were ringing nonstop. By evening, Clara's father had locked himself in his office, and the once proud woman who screamed at me through my own gate had gone silent. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply returned to my workshop, sharpened my old chisel, and kept carving. Because when you spend your life working with wood, you learn. Rot reveals itself eventually. All you have to do is wait. 3 days later, Eric came back. He looked different, tired, but lighter somehow. "She's gone," he said quietly. I didn't ask where. I didn't need to. She took her things and left her father's house this morning. The business is collapsing. They froze the accounts, and there's an investigation now. She tried to blame me, of course. But the last thing she said was she wished she'd never married into this family. I poured him a cup of tea. "She'll learn someday that wishing isn't the same as living with what you've done." He looked down at his hands. "Dad, I don't even know how to start over. Everything I tried to build with her, it's gone." I leaned back in my chair. "Then build something real this time. Not with money, not with appearances. Build something that won't collapse when people stop looking. He nodded slowly. For the first time in months, his eyes were clear. A few days later, I went into town again. The gossip was everywhere. People whispered in cafes, at the grocery store, outside the post office. The mighty Harpers had fallen overnight. Bank accounts frozen, investors gone, their mansion listed for sale. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Justice had a way of walking on its own 2 feet. As I was leaving the hardware store, I saw Lena again. She was buying paint, soft green and pale cream. New project? I asked. She smiled. My landlord's letting me repaint the apartment. Thought it might help clear my head. How's your sister? She hesitated, then said quietly, lost. Angry. She blames everyone but herself. My parents left town for a while, couldn't stand the shame. We walked together again, slow and quiet. The street was cold, but sunlight fell across her face, catching in her hair. I heard about what you did, she said. How you handled it all, without shouting, without hatred. That's rare. I shrugged. Revenge doesn't always need noise. Sometimes silence cuts deeper. She nodded thoughtfully. Still, it takes strength to stay silent. Not strength, I said. Just experience. When you've lost enough, you stop needing to prove anything. Later that evening, Eric and I stood on the farmhouse porch, looking out at the yard. The fields were turning gold again. He had dirt on his hands, sweat on his shirt, and a look in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Purpose. I started applying for carpentry jobs, he said. Figured I might as well learn from the best. I smiled faintly. You might have to sweep the floors before you touch a saw. He grinned. I can live with that. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace settle over that land. Not triumph, not vengeance, peace. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I thought of his mother. I could almost hear her voice. You don't have to win to be right. Maybe she was right all along. Because I hadn't destroyed the Harpers. They'd done that themselves. I just stopped holding the door open for them while they did it. And now, finally, I could start living again. Not as the man who was humiliated at his son's wedding, but as the father who walked away, kept his dignity, and watched the truth do its quiet work. That night, I turned off the porch light, closed the door, and whispered to the empty house. I left that wedding alone, but I never truly walked away by myself. Because some roads lead you back, not to revenge, but to redemption. The air around the farmhouse changed. It wasn't just quieter, it felt cleaner, lighter, like the land itself had been waiting to breathe again. Eric had started coming by every morning. Sometimes to help repair a fence post, sometimes just to sit on the porch with a mug of coffee. We didn't talk about the wedding anymore. Or Clara. Or her father. The silence between us had changed, no longer cold or distant, but comfortable. Healing. One morning, I found him fixing the old swing by the oak tree. The same one he used to play on when he was 7. He looked up and grinned when he saw me watching. Thought it could use another chance, he said. I smiled. So could we all. We worked together for hours, sanding the frame, tightening bolts, repainting the seat. It wasn't just a swing we were repairing. It was something else, something bigger. When we finished, he sat down and gently pushed with his feet. The swing creaked, but held steady. Feels good, he said quietly. Like I'm back where I belong. I didn't say it, but I felt the same. That weekend, Lena stopped by. She brought homemade pie. Cherry, the kind my wife used to make. I figured you two could use a little sweetness around here, she said, smiling as she set it on the table. Eric's face lit up more than I'd seen in months. You didn't have to do that, he said. Maybe not, she replied. But sometimes kindness needs no reason. We ate together that afternoon, the 3 of us. There was laughter, hesitant at first, then easy, genuine. I hadn't heard my son laugh like that since before the wedding. After Lena left, Eric looked at me, still smiling. She's something else, huh? I nodded slowly. She is. The kind of person who stays when everyone else walks away. He leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. I don't deserve that kind of person. No one starts out deserving it, I said. You earn it by not repeating your mistakes. He didn't answer, but I could see in his eyes that he understood. Over the next few weeks, word spread that Harper Construction had filed for bankruptcy. Their assets were frozen, and Clara had left town. Some said to live with an aunt, others said to start over. I didn't care which was true. Her story had moved out of my life, and I wasn't about to turn the page backward. Instead, I focused on rebuilding, Not just the house, but the life around it. I repaired the porch railings, repainted the shutters, and even planted new flowers by the walkway. Every nail I drove into the wood felt like closure. Eric began working with me part-time. He wasn't a natural carpenter. He'd always been more of a thinker than a builder, but his effort mattered more than his skill. Watching him measure planks, miscut a board, then start again with a grin reminded me that rebuilding is a kind of forgiveness. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air smelled like rain, Eric asked quietly, "Do you ever regret it, Dad? Leaving that night?" I thought for a moment. "No," I said. "If I hadn't left, you wouldn't have seen who they really were. Sometimes walking away is the only way to show people what you're worth." He nodded, staring into the distance. "I get that now." Later that night, after he'd gone home, I sat on the porch with a glass of tea. The moonlight fell over the yard, touching the grass like silver dust. For the first time in years, I felt content. The world had spun full circle, from humiliation to peace, without me raising my voice once. Revenge hadn't been a fire. It had been a seed. Quiet, patient, and inevitable. Somewhere down the road, Clara would wake up in a small apartment, wondering where all the noise and glamour had gone. Her father would face his debts, his empire in ruins. And Eric, my son, would finally understand that respect can't be bought, only built. As for me, I'd built something new, something worth keeping. And when Lena's car lights appeared again at the end of the road, I didn't feel anger anymore. Only gratitude, for second chances, for quiet evenings, for the sound of an old swing creaking under a golden sky. It started with simple things, short visits, small favors, and quiet evenings. Lena would stop by with groceries after her hospital shift, claiming she had extra soup or too much bread. I never believed her excuses, but I didn't argue. She brought life back into the house, the kind that doesn't come from words, but from presence. The way she hummed softly while washing cups, the way she brushed dust from the windowsill before setting down flowers. Small things, ordinary things, the kind that remind you that peace isn't loud. One evening, Eric came home later than usual, tired but smiling. "Dad," he said, "I got hired. Construction company over in Masonville. They said my references were solid." I looked up from the workbench. "You used me as a reference?" He grinned. "Who else would I use?" That night, we had dinner together again, the kind that didn't need to be special to feel right. After he left, Lena lingered. The house was dim, just the warm glow of the lamp by the table. She stood by the doorway, unsure if she should speak. "You're proud of him," she said. "I am," I replied quietly. "He's finally standing on his own 2 feet. She smiled softly. "Maybe he learned that from you." I shook my head. "No, he learned it from falling." Her smile faded into thought. "Maybe we all do." A week later, she asked if I could help her fix a broken cabinet in her apartment. I agreed, mostly to have something to do besides think. Her place was small but clean, soft colors, plants on the windowsill, a stack of medical textbooks on the table. I spent the afternoon tightening hinges and replacing boards. She sat nearby, telling stories about the hospital, the people she'd met, the long nights, the moments that made it worth it. When I finished, she handed me a glass of lemonade. Payment for a hard day's work. I chuckled. "You'll make me a rich man if you keep paying like this." She smiled. "Rich in company, maybe." That line lingered longer than it should have. Days turned into weeks. Spring crept over the hills, and color returned to everything. The farmhouse, once quiet and lonely, began to sound alive again. Tools clanking, laughter from the yard, the low hum of the radio. Eric had started spending weekends fixing the old barn, while Lena often joined us, bringing food or helping paint. The 3 of us worked like we'd known each other for years. One afternoon, while we rested under the oak tree, Lena asked, "Do you ever miss her, your wife?" I looked up through the branches. "Every day, but missing someone isn't the same as being stuck in the past." She nodded, looking down at her hands. "I miss people who never really left. That's worse." There was a long silence before I said, "Some people stay as lessons, others as warmth. You just have to know which is which." She smiled faintly. "And which am I?" I met her eyes, soft, uncertain, but full of something I hadn't felt in years. "Still figuring that out?" I said. The wind carried her quiet laughter between the trees. That night, after she left, I stood at the doorway and watched her taillights disappear down the road. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel old. I didn't feel bitter. I just felt alive. Revenge had been my shadow for months. Now it was fading. In its place was something gentler. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't seeing someone fall. It's finding peace while they're still searching for it. And as the stars came out over the fields, I realized I was no longer walking away from something. I was walking towards something new. I hadn't seen Clara in nearly half a year. By then, the farmhouse was alive again. The fences repaired, the garden blooming, and laughter echoing from the porch almost every evening. Lena's visits had become routine, Eric's confidence had returned, and for the first time in years, I could wake up without that old weight in my chest. But life has a way of bringing unfinished stories back to your door, usually when you least expect it. It happened on a gray Thursday morning. I'd gone into town for supplies, same as always, and stopped at the hardware store to pick up nails and paint thinner. As I was paying, I heard a voice behind me. Faint, familiar, trembling. Mr. Lawson? I turned. Clara stood there. If it weren't for her eyes, I might not have recognized her. The once perfect hair now hung dull and uneven. Her tailored clothes replaced by a simple jacket, worn at the seams. But it wasn't her appearance that stopped me. It was the way she carried herself. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something fragile. Clara, I said, calm but cautious. She gave a weak smile. I didn't think you'd even talk to me. I talk to everyone, I said. Some just choose not to listen. Her eyes filled with a sadness I hadn't seen before. I wanted to apologize. The words felt strange coming from her. Almost foreign. She looked down at her hands. Everything fell apart. My father's company, the house, even my friends. They all disappeared once the money did. I thought I was doing what was right, protecting our name. I see now there wasn't much worth protecting. I stayed quiet. Let her speak. Sometimes silence tells the truth better than words. She took a deep breath. Eric, is he okay? He's more than okay, I said. He's working, building something real, something that'll last. A single tear slipped down her cheek. I'm glad. He deserves that. I nodded slowly. He does. We all get what we build, Clara. You built something that looked perfect from the outside, but it had no foundation. She nodded. I know. Her voice was barely a whisper. I lost everything, Mr. Lawson. But the one thing that hurts most is knowing I lost respect. Yours and his. I looked at her for a long time. Once, I'd imagined this moment. Imagined saying something cutting, something that would make her feel what I'd felt that day at the wedding. But standing there, watching her break down in a quiet hardware store, I realized something. Revenge was over. You didn't lose my respect, I said softly. You gave it away. She covered her face with her hands, crying quietly. People around us pretended not to notice. I waited until she calmed down, then handed her a tissue from my pocket. What will you do now? I asked. I don't know, she said. Maybe go back to nursing school. I was studying before I met Eric. Feels like a lifetime ago. Then do it, I said. Start again. Not for anyone's approval. For yourself. She blinked at me, surprised. You tell me that? After everything? I'm not doing it for you, I said. I'm doing it because carrying anger only makes you the same as the people who gave it to you. She nodded slowly, as if trying to understand a language she'd never spoken before. Thank you, she whispered. I smiled faintly. Take care of yourself, Clara. And with that, I walked out. No grand ending, no final blow. Just peace. Outside, the air smelled like rain. I stood for a moment, watching the clouds roll over the hills. For months, I'd thought revenge was my closure. But closure didn't come from watching others fall. It came from realizing you'd already climbed out. As I got into my truck, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The same face, a few more lines, but lighter somehow. That night, I told Lena what happened. She listened quietly, then asked, Do you feel better? I thought for a moment. Not better. Just done. She smiled. That's better than better. We sat on the porch until the stars came out, the air filled with the scent of pine and the sound of the swing creaking gently in the wind. For the first time since that awful day at the wedding, I realized I didn't think about the past anymore. It no longer owned me. Spring came early that year. The air was soft, the hills a brighter green than I remembered, and the farmhouse looked almost new again. Sometimes I'd catch myself standing by the window in the mornings, coffee in hand, just watching the mist lift off the fields, The kind of sight that makes you realize life doesn't stop after pain. It just changes shape. Eric was thriving. He'd kept his job in Masonville and spent his weekends here, helping me fix whatever needed fixing. The roof, the porch, or sometimes nothing at all. We didn't need reasons to be together anymore. One Saturday, I found him by the fence, hammer in hand, humming softly. He looked up and smiled. Guess what? What? I've been saving up. Thinking of buying a small plot near town. Build a workshop. Maybe hire a few guys. Take some contracts. I raised an eyebrow. A family business? He grinned. Maybe call it Lawson and Son. I chuckled, pretending to be unimpressed, but inside something warm bloomed. Pride. The quiet kind that doesn't need words. Your mother would have liked that, I said softly. I think she would have too. That evening, Lena came over with dinner, roast chicken, potatoes, and that same cherry pie she always made. She fit into our rhythm like she'd been there all along. The three of us ate under the open sky, the table lit by an old lantern, fireflies floating in the dusk. When Eric went inside to take a call, she stayed behind, sipping tea beside me. You've built something beautiful here, she said. It wasn't easy, I replied. Took losing almost everything to see what was left. She looked at me with that quiet strength in her eyes, the kind you only find in people who've survived their own storms. You didn't just survive, she said. You rebuilt. I turned toward her. The lantern light flickered across her face, and for a moment, I saw not the nurse who followed me out of a wedding, but the woman who helped me remember what living felt like. Maybe it's time to stop rebuilding, I said. Maybe it's time to just live. She smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't fade easily. Then let's live, Richard. Later that night, after she'd gone and the house had fallen quiet, I stepped onto the porch one last time. The swing creaked softly in the wind. The same one Eric had fixed months ago, still holding strong. I thought about everything that had happened. The humiliation, the betrayal, the cold nights spent wondering where I'd gone wrong. But none of it hurt anymore. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, still peace. Because revenge, I realized, was never about making others suffer. It was about reclaiming your dignity, silently, patiently, until the weight on your chest finally lifts. In the distance, I could see headlights, Lena's car, driving down the same road that once took Clara away. But this time, it wasn't a road of endings. It was one of beginnings. I sat down on the swing, feeling the wood creak beneath me, and smiled. For the first time in a long time, my heart didn't ache. It simply beat, steady, calm, free. Epilogue. They say revenge changes people. Maybe they're right. But for me, it didn't turn into bitterness. It turned into clarity. I lost my son once, but I gained him back. I lost my peace, but I built it again, board by board, breath by breath. And though the past still whispers sometimes, I've learned to let it fade with the wind. Because in the end, I didn't walk away from that wedding in shame. I walked away toward the rest of my life. And I didn't walk away alone.